Her name is Lyas Bozel. She thought she had the perfect life. Lisa was named top entrepreneur by Day Spa magazine, and she knows the beauty secrets to the stars. She has received accolades from beauty editors in Vogue, Cosmo, Allure, InStyle, and other magazines for her award-winning Day Spa. Through her seventh sense of intuition, her awareness unearthed realities about her life and unveiled untruths that have been hidden for generations and changed the foundation of her life forever. In that life-changing experience, Lisa defined and refined herself a new life.
I'm Lyas Bozel, and you're watching Inspiration Nation.
Hi, Diana. Thank
Hello.
you for coming on Inspiration Nation today.
Great. Glad to be here.
I understand your name is Diana, right? And you do
Hypnotherapy.
And regression
with
therapy.
Regression therapy, yes.
great.
Yes.
Okay. So I've had a lot of our listeners and viewers ask me questions about different episodes that we've had. And I was asked the other day about regression therapy. So I called you up and said, how would you like to be on the show? And you said that would be great. But I'm also curious because of my own experiences. And I'd like you to explain to the viewers how that works, what it is, and where you take people, what it has to do with.
Okay. Regression therapy is, it's underneath the hypnotherapy. And what happens with regression therapy is we're dealing with the client's emotions. And really, hypnotherapy is all about dealing with the client's emotions. So what our initial approach is to find the emotion if they're coming for it. If they're coming for fear, if they're coming for, whatever emotion they're coming for, that's really like fear of flying or anxiety or fears that they can't even figure out where the fears are coming from. They just are fear of heights or,
So they're not clear what these feelings are. They just feel them, and it creates anxiety. And your job is to help them figure out where it stemmed from originally.
It takes over their life. When they come to the point where they come looking for help, usually they've kind of gone every other way. They've gone to psychologists, they've sought out help with taking medications. When they come to a regression therapist, they have been looking for help. And I'm not saying that all the time. I mean, I have people that I've done weight loss clients that we've done regression, and we have found very interesting things that really was the block that kept them from going forward and losing weight. But
So it helps people to lose weight too.
it does help people. Well, it depends if it's the right situation. Weight, it could be that weight is just eating too much but I've had situations where it was a situation where well, let me tell you about that one. I had a fella that was way overweight. I mean, like 100 pounds overweight, and he really was eating pretty healthy. He knew the nutrition, but he had tried so many ways to lose weight. And honestly, I don't usually use regression therapy the first time with weight loss. But he described to me how he feels out of control, and no matter, he knows all of this information, he just feels like it's the only thing that soothes him, when he
Emotionally.
Emotionally is when he just overeats to the point that he feels like he feels bloated, he feels not good. Anyway, when we did his regression, he ended up going to a point of his was 3 or 4 years old, and so we go back to that, and I said, so now you have all these feelings that you do when you overeat and you feel so bloated, and that's how I get him back to that state. And he comes that he's 3 years old, and I don't ask leading questions, but I ask, is it day or night, or are you alone or with someone? And all he would say, this is very unusual, that all he would say is, I hear the dog barking. And it got so frustrating to me because usually the clients will kind of take themselves to, he did go to age 3, but we couldn't get beyond that. So I just switched off and did a weight loss kind of hypnotic trance that I do for normal weight loss. But when I brought him out of trance and I talked with him, I told him, I told him before we went in, we were going to do this age regression, and this is all he kept saying was, I hear the dog barking. So his mother filled in the details. He was born deaf, and the doctor told her, we can't do the surgery to correct this. There's something with his eardrum and his ear canal. We can't do the surgery to correct this. Now it'll be much easier and safer if we wait till he's 3. And so that was what they were going to do, but before they did the surgery at age 3, his hearing came back. And so what the mother filled in the rest of the details was, there was no way we could console him. When he heard the dog barking, he was just crying and crying, and the only way they could console him was to feed him.
Oh.
And she said, so we just fed him and he would stop crying. And that guy started losing weight so fast.
Wow.
I mean, it was just like, he was following it on an app, and it was an app on your phone. And I said, where your friends can hook into it, I said, let me follow you on this too, because he was just, the pounds were just coming off. And then we hit a plateau, and that was because his dad said, you were not 3 then, you were 5. And then he kind of stopped losing weight. And so I was following that, and we were coming in on session, so I just asked him a question, and I said, so really, what difference does it make if you were 3 or 5? And he said, yeah, you're right. He's like, and this was just all over the phone. And he just continued. And I mean, that was 100 pounds. He must have taken that off. I was kind of worried because
that's significant weight.
It was 100 pounds, and he took it off in less than 6 months.
Wow.
And it was so easy, and it was just, but that's unusual. I don't usually find that in weight loss.
So you take them back. So you have a client who comes to you and says, I have issues with abandonment. And you take them back to that time, or you ask them the first time?
First, I find out, how does that feel? When you say abandonment, I get your emotions. Where do you feel that in your body? How does that make you feel? And so I hear your words, that I feel paralyzed. I feel betrayed. They give me these words, and those are the words that their subconscious is using, but it's
to communicate to you.
To communicate to me, but it's also, it's their description now of this feeling that they've got in their body, their emotional feeling, this abandonment. So then I listen to the client will tell me, I'll say, why do you think you have this? And the client will give me, like the woman I was telling you about at 27, I was in a plane crash. Well, they'll give me whatever things that they think is the reason for these issues of abandonment. And I note it but I'm not really hanging my hat on that, because I know that there's so much more that has happened in the subconscious that I don't want to be misdirected to that one event that the client is consciously correlating. So then we connect those emotions using that emotional state, and using the words that the client described can get us back to what we call either the initial sensitizing event, the first time they felt these emotions, or the subsequent sensitizing event. It just depends, but we may go back a couple of times depending on what we get at each age. Usually it's an earlier age. It's under the age of 6.
So these situations, these are like traumas that they experienced?
It's interpreted by that client as
As a trauma.
traumatic, yeah. And
So
it generates these emotions, and the emotions are a chemical toxin almost to the body. There's chemical good feeling things too with emotions, like endorphins and serotonin, dopamine. But also, when you've got this chemical that is toxic, it continues to generate that in the body.
So from the time that the person experiences that first trauma, you're saying that chemically it impacts them throughout their whole life if they continue to have this
They can
this
generate that
experience over and over in their mind. They keep replaying this pattern, and it affects them throughout their life.
It will affect their, yes, because it's a pattern they
And their
develop.
relationships.
Did you ever see the movie What the Bleep?
No.
Okay, well, that movie is a very good movie, and people experiencing emotions, and then how it's a pathway that you develop, and so you can generate those emotions much more quickly in other circumstances. Anyway, that's a interesting. So the emotions have a lot of chemical production that the body does, and it can be good and it can be bad. It can just be, it doesn't have to be good or bad. But it's so much in what the mind interprets and what the body generates.
So when you go into the subconscious, because obviously, when people tell you their experience, they're telling you from what they either feel or know intellectually, consciously.
No, they're telling me from their subconscious.
When they're under hypnosis, but when they come to you originally and they say, I have an issue,
they just tell me consciously.
They're telling you what they think it might be,
Right,
but you're saying you delve deeper into the subconscious.
That could very well be. If they, the lady, like I told you, with the 27 in a plane crash, it could very well be the initial sensitizing event. But I'm not going to just take everything,
what they're saying.
Yeah, because it just may, their subconscious is blocking it from them. They're being, so I have helped them. My job is just to be a guide. And so I help guide them to find where those emotions are generated and what places makes them makes these chemical changes in your body.
How many sessions do you recommend for something like that?
It depends. Minimum I've done is 2. But sometimes it can be 5, sometimes it can be 10. Average maybe 3 to 5. Because what happens is client gets feeling good and they've gotten in touch with, they don't, it spills over to everything else in their life too. They don't really need someone to help them uncover this because they figured it out. Sometimes they come back
Say I'm all better.
Yeah, and want to work on something else, and that's great.
So when you take them back in your hypnosis to those ages, and you start pinpointing the different traumas during that time, when you take them back as the adult, so you say this client of yours is 42, is she under hypnosis when she's going back to the 3-year-old? Because these are like ghost children that continue to exist inside of us.
That's a good description. Yes.
I had experience when I met my husband. I hadn't seen him in 33 years. And when I first saw him, it was like this child surfaced out of nowhere. It was like this 14-year-old that he left when we were in high school literally surfaced out of me, and I didn't know where this person came from, because it was completely not me. And it kind of freaked me out, because at first I thought, well, what is that? But it's like she was dormant, and then all of a sudden she came to life, and she continued to stick around, and then, when we separated, when he left, I hadn't seen him in a long time. It was like reliving that whole trauma of when he left when we were children all over again, because he left when I was 14 very abruptly back to Tampa. So I hadn't seen him in almost 33 years.
And then when you saw him again, you had the experience of this 14-year-old emerged.
Out of nowhere. I mean, literally, it was like I didn't even know she existed.
Okay, well, when that 14-year-old emerged, was there the great sensations of, because this was like, your husband was like your boyfriend.
We weren't even boyfriend, girlfriend. We knew each other in high school. We'd met, he lived with some teachers of mine in high school. And we kissed a couple times, but it was nothing more than that. There wasn't anything sexual. But in my mind, he was going to be my first boyfriend, and we were going to date. So I had all these expectations.
And then he left.
And then my parents, I wasn't even allowed to date yet, but then he abruptly left. Like he was here one day and then he was gone the next day. So it was very traumatic for me that he left so quickly. And we continued to talk throughout the years. We would speak on the phone, and I begged my parents to let me see him, take me to Tampa to see Mike. And they said, no, he's 18 and you're 14, you're not going. But over the years, I would continue to call him just to see how he was, how are you? And he was always very distant, very aloof. And then as I approached 50, I realized he wasn't coming back. So I tracked him down. And when I finally saw him, this person, this, child surfaced out of nowhere. And it was bizarre, because I'm like, oh my God, am I losing my mind? What's going on? So I started thinking, is it possible that we have these ghost children living inside of us when you have unresolved issues?
Well, it definitely sounds like you had an unresolved issue. I don't know that I would call it, but you connected to the feelings of the last time that you had physical contact being around him.
Mm-hmm.
So all those emotions woke up, and they were emotions from a 14-year-old. And
so we stay in those states inside of ourselves. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes and no. But here was, this was a traumatic state for you. I mean, your parents didn't think it was traumatic. He's 18, you're 14. Get over it.
Right, exactly.
And,
that's exactly what my mom said.
But you had already envisioned that this is like going to be your boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And then when he abruptly leaves, how did you manage to stay in touch over the years? You just called every couple of years? Or?
It was actually triggered every time there was a high school reunion.
Okay.
So every 10 years. I mean, in the beginning we talked for a couple of years. And then I was in high school, so I. And then I was in high school, so I eventually got a boyfriend,
mm-hmm.
And time went on. And then, we would talk probably into our early 20s. And then,
was he married?
He got married around my my first high school reunion, my 10-year. He was around that time. He was going to get married.
Had he graduated high school when he left?
Yes. But not here in Tampa. It was in California. So around that time I called him, and he mentioned that he was getting married. I was single. I didn't have a boyfriend, but he was getting married. So it didn't bother me that much, because I knew he had a girlfriend. He was in Tampa. I didn't think about it very much. But then I called him again about 10 years later. And I always sensed this resistance. Like he wasn't interested in talking to me, or, he didn't want to see me. And I even asked my husband, who I was married to, I said, well, why don't we fly out to Tampa and see Mike and Michelle and bring them, take them to dinner, or fly them out here to California.
Did your husband know him?
He never met him, but, Ron was conservative and thought it was kind of weird. But I didn't, because I thought, people, why not see each other? He wasn't a threat. I didn't feel he was a threat to our marriage, or I was a threat to his marriage. And as time went on, you know, the closer I got to 50 and realizing he's really not coming back, that became a whole other trauma, because I started looking people up from my past that had died or that, you know, weren't around anymore. And I thought, well, you know, what if something's happened to him? So, you know, I looked him up and hired a private investigator to find him. And then we eventually saw each other.
Mm-hmm.
And what also was very peculiar is I never had any romantic interest as far as wanting to marry him, or, you know, thinking, oh my God, you know, how come he didn't marry me? You know, it was just all these emotions like exploded once we saw each other. And it became permanent, like we were imprinted emotionally as young children. And that bond is so fierce. It's stronger than any other bond I've ever felt in my entire life.
That's pretty interesting experience, because it's like those emotions, did you just kind of let them go? Because it's what your parents said, just get over it. You're
Mm-hmm.
14, you got a whole life ahead of you. And you managed to stay in touch just a little bit, but something triggered the whole reconnection. Apparently he must have felt the same way, right?
Well, he did. Eventually, he, you know, a week before he saw each other, he sent me a music video and said that he loved me. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, sobbing, like, you know, really, really sobbing. And again, as I think back, I think it was that 14-year-old, because my husband woke up and he said, you know, what's the matter? And I said, well, Mike told me he loved me today. And he said, well, how do you feel? And I said, well, I love Mike. I said, and I've waited my whole life to hear this. And I was going to come and see Mike, you know, a week later.
You told your husband.
I was telling my husband this, and he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, I can't guarantee our marriage. Now, he thought I was losing my mind because 7 or 8 years before, I'd found a father I was not aware of. And I had this gut intuition that my father who raised me was not my father, that he was not biologically my dad. So there was a whole other trauma that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And brothers, you know, 10 brothers and sisters that I wasn't aware of. So it started to unravel everything, but I didn't really see it. My husband at the time didn't see it. So when I finally saw Mike, that connection was just so extreme. And then, you know, telling Ron, well, I can't guarantee our marriage. As I think back, I'm thinking, why would I say something like that? But again, I felt like this child, this person,
Mm-hmm.
every time Mike was mentioned, it would like come out of nowhere. And the closer I got to him, the stronger she became. The more she became like real, not like a split personality, but just this very aggressive, demanding 14-year-old that had been, you know, denied this contact. And now she's going to have this contact. And now, you know, she's going to make sure no matter what, we're going to see Mike.
Well, you know, this would be a fun regression to just investigate what woke those
I'm definitely
feelings
coming
up
to see
and
you.
what brought all that up. I'm wondering in the same time, though, Mike, you said at times when you would be in touch with him, he would just kind of
He was very
not be
aloof.
interested. Yeah.
And I always felt like, am I, you know, is he seeing me as some, you know, little kid who's, you know, clinging onto him? Because he was so much older. You know, when you're 14, you
Oh,
think
yeah, it's a
18,
big
you're like
difference.
a
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, yeah. It would be very interesting to find all those emotions and where they connect. But you know, there are no accidents in this world, and things happen exactly as they're supposed to happen. But it's always so intriguing to see something as your story, and we would be able to, under hypnosis, to be able to just kind of unravel some of those emotions that kept getting triggered. Obviously, he responded to the 14-year-old girl as, 20 years later or 30 years later, because that was the one he had left, and that wasn't the 14-year-old girl that was doing the calls, right? I mean, it was just a friend and just trying to keep
and
up.
I was trying, I just called him out of curiosity to say, just give me a call. I'd like to say hi, see how you are. And there was no romantic interest. There was no interest like I had an agenda, I have to have you. It wasn't like that. It was just, I'm a very curious person, and I will stay in touch with people, and I will, want to have a contact with you. But the closer it got, I remember a conversation where I said, if I'm out of line, just tell me, because I could feel these feelings that were not, they were like these feelings that were surfacing, and I didn't know what they were. And he was always trying to be very respectful of my marriage. He was separated. He'd just gotten separated. And he just was always keeping me at a distance. And he said, because I figured if I told you I had an interest, that, you would be interested, and I didn't want to jeopardize your life because, I didn't think it was appropriate. But I believe that, feelings, when people have feelings, they need to listen to their feelings. When you suppress your feelings, I think it becomes a bigger issue.
You mentioned something else along the way, finding a man that was your father that you didn't know was your father. Was
Right.
that, how were you guided to that?
Well, it started about 20 years ago. It was right before I got married to my ex-husband, Ron. I started having these very strong feelings that my father, who raised me, was not my biological father. It was just intuition. So I told Ron about it.
How old were you?
29.
29.
So it was just this feeling in my gut that he wasn't my father. And I told Ron about it, and I said,
Was it a good relationship with that father?
I never felt connected. I never felt we were connected. We were connected through a toxic bond because of the relationship with my mom. He had a very bad marriage with my mom. It was dysfunctional. So I always felt this connection with him, like we were surviving together in this dysfunction against my mother. That's how I felt. So once that dysfunction separated him, I went on my own way. There was no relationship anymore. But it was beyond that. I felt it was more, the more I thought about it, and I really started feeling myself and listening to what my intuition was saying, I felt he wasn't my dad. So I told my husband at the time, I don't feel that he's my father. And Ron said, well, I think you're wrong, and I think, you don't have enough to do, and, we need to find you something to do. So I let it go. But I didn't really. I let it go. I didn't look into it, but I still had this feeling. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I decided to listen. And I approached my dad, and I said, you know what, I don't think you're my father. And he said, well, that's very hurtful. And I said, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm telling you that I don't feel you're my father, and I want you to take a paternity test. So he did. And the day before he took it, the results came back. My aunt called my mom and said, you need to call Lisa and talk to her. And she didn't feel there was a need. So, we spoke very briefly. And the next day I got the results, and he was not my father. So it was very, very, very traumatic.
Did your mother know this all along?
Everybody knew. Everybody knew.
He knew too?
He knew too.
Oh, but he just went along
Nobody, my family, there's a lot of denial in all families. And I'm not the type of person to tolerate denial, because I feel that if you don't deal with reality, it's going to crash on your head. So when there's an issue or a problem, I take it head on, and I say, okay, we're going to take care of this. We're going to deal with it. We're going to resolve it and move forward. So it was not just, it didn't just impact my life, but my life had no integrity from the time I was small, because I was literally living this lie. And I didn't know it, but I believe that my issues of abandonment started
Yeah.
when my mother and my biological father were no longer involved. Because I believe that children can sense, when you're small, you can't articulate your fear or whatever you're feeling. So you feel it. As children, we're very intuitive. We only have our gut to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So as a child, I felt that loss. Even though I didn't see him and I didn't know him,
And
I felt the loss.
so how is it you ended up finding your birth father?
I looked him up. I went through a company.
Did your
and
mom give you his name?
my father who raised me gave me his name. When I approached him and showed him, the DNA results with my aunt, he said, well, if it's not me, I believe it's, this person. So I tracked him down. And at first, the children that I tracked down first were very negative about him and, had their own stories and, told me a lot of terrible things about him.
About your biological,
My biological father.
And they were his children?
Right. He was a womanizer and slept around a lot and had 10 children. And all of these children were pretty much broken because they didn't have relationships with him. He helped them financially to some degree, but there was no emotional contact. He was never a father to any of these children. But I needed to find that out on my own. So it unraveled my marriage because I didn't feel the support of my husband because he really didn't know what to do. I mean, neither one of us knew what to do with this whole thing. And so, I was flying everybody around to meet each other and trying to make something good out of this mess. And there really wasn't anything there for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very disruptive, and there's really no bond. I have some bonds with some of the children. But that was pretty much it. But it really destroyed my marriage to my husband. So a couple years later, when I found Mike, that was a whole other trauma. So these two traumas I really feel are very connected.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, yeah.
I tell Mike, when we got together, we were more wound mates than soulmates because I had to resolve a lot before I could really completely connect with them, because I believe you have to have vulnerability and trust to have intimacy in any relationship. And when you don't trust people or you don't trust their judgment, I think that interferes with the intimacy that you're trying to develop in a relationship.
And you probably observed that as a child with your mother and the man who raised you in this very dysfunctional. So that's what's probably directed you to be more intuitive, to listen to...
As survival. It's a survival mechanism. To really listen, because as I look back on my life, I've listened to a lot of things. I never really felt it was a gift. I felt it was more just survival. But if you really listen, your gut is always right. It's always there. It's not just when you're a child. But I think as adults that we suppress it. As we get older, people tell you, oh, don't worry about that, or oh, let it go, and so we feel something and then we suppress it because people tell us, well, don't listen. But we need to listen, because when you don't, something's always going to go wrong.
Well, I wouldn't say something's always going to go wrong, but it is much healthier
to listen.
But children develop means of protecting themselves emotionally, and so that's in my business with regression. That's kind of how these things get buried, is that it's a protective mechanism. In your case, I don't know, I'm sure it was a protective mechanism, but it still was something that you felt always in your beingness, because you found you use your intuition, which would be nice if more of us did. But all of that coming together, it's really a good place to be. Although you may feel more hurt in life, but you will probably feel more joy in life because you allow yourself to go to those places. And a lot of people don't. They brush it under.
They do. And I'm the type that rips it open. I'm writing a book right now called Elephants on a Pedestal. And that's part of it is, you know, you have the elephant in the room, the big thing that nobody ever wants to talk about. And it's there, whether we talk about it or not, it exists and it has its own energy. And unless you deal with it, then, you know, when you talk out loud and you speak about it, it just shrinks that, you know, that scariness about that big giant elephant in the room.
Yeah.
But I think if people make more of an effort to listen to themselves and what they hear.
And when you say gut, you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
It is.
It literally
It's a gut
is in
feeling.
your gut.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm so acutely sensitive now if somebody lies to me consistently. I don't mean like, you know, I can't have dinner with you and, you know, they just don't want to do it. But I mean, if it's compounded and it's consistent, the more they do it, the more I feel it. And then I just call them on it because I know I'm right. And it's not even that I want to be right. I don't even really want to know that you're lying. But it's really about just be honest, whatever it is, because you can't have a relationship if people aren't going to be honest with you. It's
Oh,
very
absolutely.
difficult, you know, because a lot of times I think people just blow it off. Like you said, they just brush it away and
Well, yeah, because it's so much easier to deal with. It'd be nice if you could train our politicians.
and it's hard to have relationships with parents who aren't honest with their children.
Or they haven't been honest with each other.
Right.
And that-
Or themselves.
Yeah.
So to me, it's not even about what happened. You know, the relationships that I have with my parents could have hopefully have gone in a positive direction, but I would say there's really not relationships with any of them at this point because there was no effort to have a good future together. It was more about an explanation about the past and this is what happened. And there's no excuse for any parent who's lying to their children about who their parents are. I don't care if they're adopted. I don't care if they have a new father. I don't care whatever happened with the father. When you don't tell your children the truth about their biological parents, you undermine the trust. And I don't think you can really get it back once you lose that with a child.
I would agree with that. The parents probably have a reason why they do it, but I would agree there's a trust that's been undermined that will never come back.
Mhm. It's very disruptive.
Yes. If that been lying about that, what else have they lied
Right.
about in my life? Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Well, that's very interesting. Very, very interesting.
So I think in the future, if any parents, you know, have something to say to their children, they really should just address it as soon as they can and not wait till the child finds out, because there's a lot of children. I have a stepbrother who found a biological sister on Facebook, just randomly. He found the sister
that will
on
be an
Facebook.
interesting story
and,
to unravel.
and then all of a sudden he brought her to my house. I'm like, you know, how did you find her? And he said, well, I found her on Facebook. And he just had a feeling and started talking and said, do you know so-and-so? And they had the same parent. And so this was before my situation. So I remember as a child, I was at Thanksgiving and I had, my grandmother had a brother show up at Thanksgiving that she wasn't aware of, or that, you know, people weren't aware. He just came to the door and it was this big, you know, drama because, you know, there was this brother out of nowhere. And I think I was like 11 or 12 and I remember thinking, wow, you know, can you imagine that happening? And then I find 10 brothers and sisters and, you know, a biological father.
So your siblings are all from your biological father?
Mhm. I was
So-
raised an only child, it was more traumatic because I didn't know what it was like having brothers and sisters. So I didn't just have one. I had, you know, this litter of brothers and sisters that were all different. You know, they were so different
Did they
from
all
my life.
know? They all knew each other.
They knew about each other. Some didn't. The one I'm the closest to, Desiree, she was more in my situation where she knew of one. I didn't know of any, but she knew of one. And then there were all these other siblings, you know, that surfaced that because he had affairs. So my brother, Richard, and I are 6 months apart because both women were pregnant at the same time. And, you know, the other children were out of affairs and, you know, my brother hadn't really met these other children because they were out of affairs. But when I came into the picture, I brought everybody together. I flew everybody to Utah, and I flew everybody to my house, and we had barbecues and birthday parties, but there was no substance to it. I was trying to create memories and a history that we didn't have.
Yeah,
and you can't do that.
No,
it's just not going to happen.
It's also different. It's
right.
It's
a toxic situation.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's I mean, that's the reality of it. It's these, you know, we were all born out of affairs. I mean, my mom, he was married when he was with my mom. She was like 17. She was very young. Didn't know he was married.
Oh, he was married.
He
so
was
he wasn't
married.
married to your mom.
No, he was married to somebody else. And he got together with my mother, I think she was 17. And then he continued these affairs throughout his marriage for another 25 years with all these other women and had all these children. And these children, when I met them, some of them knew about each other and some of them didn't. Some of them knew about me. And
because some of their mothers he did marry, right?
No, he only married the first woman, and then he got married a second time later in his life. But out of all of the 10 children, I think there was only 3 that were related to the marriages. 1 from his second marriage and 2 from his first marriage. The rest were out of affairs.
So those are pretty big detective work to uncover, bring all those together. You must have had some help doing
But again,
that.
you know, I went with intuition.
Mm.
I literally went with feeling, because that's really all I had at that point. I couldn't trust anybody because I felt like everybody knew, and it was very uncomfortable.
Well, that's right, because
know.
everybody did know.
Right.
In your,
You know, everybody said they didn't, but again, I just listened and I felt, you know, they do know, and they did know. And, you know, when people are in that situation, nobody wants to get involved, nobody wants to point fingers, nobody, you know, it's so traumatic for everyone involved. It's so uncomfortable. And I try to tell people on my show, you need to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's how we grow.
yes.
Because when you're in that comfort zone, there's no growth. And in this kind of a situation, it's like sinking or swimming. You know, you have an option. You have one or the other. You either lose it completely and let it consume you, or you say, no, I'm going to control my life. I'm going to take charge of my life, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to find out all the gory details, and then we're going to move forward.
I can agree with that to a certain extent. In your case, it's definitely was the thing to do, to uncover. But there are folks that they just don't. I have worked with adopted children that know, one that I'm thinking about in particular, she knew was adopted from the time of as early as she could remember. She came from a Catholic orphanage. But she felt, and her father later, when she was 18, even gave her the stuff to find her biological parents if she so chose. But she felt that it would be more hurtful to the birth parents, and she waited for them both to pass away. And then she did pursue it, and found out good things and interesting things. But really, it is you got into this world, however you got into this world, and actually I strongly believe that you chose the route you came in. It's not, you chose it, and yeah, your parents played their part, but you chose the route you came in, and it just makes for some people like you, it fulfills you, it strengthens you, you feel like you've connected with who you are. Some people, it's not the thing to do.
Right, it's not for everyone.
Yes.
It's not for everyone. I mean, sometimes when I first moved here, I would look around like, what am I doing here? You know, I felt almost bewildered because it seemed so strange and it was so different from my life, and all of a sudden I'm in LA and I'm grounded. I have this amazing life, my husband, everything was great, and then just like that. And now I'm in Florida and now I have this life. And I used to think, well, you know, it's my destiny, but I really believe, you know, it's not my timing, it's God's timing. That's how I believe. And so I don't question it anymore. I just know I belong here. And wherever I go, I'm going to make an amazing life.
That's terrific.
And hope I compliment other people's while I'm doing it. So
That's terrific. I love that. And that's what it's about. And as long as you get joy from that, then it's a great approach.
oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for being on our show today.
Thank
I'm
you.
Lyas Bozel, and you're watching Inspiration Nation.